I'm George Galloway, and I present Kalima Horra on Almayadeen television. Here we are in London. I speak my words freely, either in Parliament, on television, here on the streets of London. Kalima Horra means free word. That's what I speak. So Kalima Horra is a two-way conversation. Check it out on Almayadeen television. Welcome to Kalima Horra with me, George Galloway, on Almayadeen television, coming to you from London, with, as always, an audience of distinguished experts and one or two enthusiastic amateurs like me. We're discussing the crisis in the Gulf. Once upon a time, people thought that crisis in the Gulf might just mean a bit of a contretemps between the tiny emirates in what was once upon a time Arabia. But now, the crisis in the Gulf has as its epicenter the slaughter of Yemen. Yemen is being massacred in front of our eyes. Well, in front of our eyes if we have access to the very few televisions that are showing what is actually happening there. There is famine, starvation, a cholera epidemic. People are dying like flies. And when they're not dying like flies, they're being killed on the streets. The Saudi-led coalition, though in fact it's an American-led coalition, armed by the United States and Britain, and coordinated in a command and control cell by British and American officers. When I was a young man just getting into my anti-imperialist stride, the sight of British soldiers shooting down people in Aden in the streets was one of my earliest and most forming of experiences. The British never really went away, or at least they are back. But the Americans are pulling the strings, no doubt with some advice from the new Saudi friend in Tel Aviv, or is it these days in Jerusalem? Occupied, all of it in any case. The reality is, though, that the Yemen imbroglio, this bloody imbroglio, is only a part of the crisis in the Gulf. The contretemps to which I referred earlier is no joke. The demand that Al Jazeera television be closed down to please the princes in Saudi Arabia and elsewhere in the Gulf was just one of the issues. The economic sanctions, the blockade, in fact, that has been placed around the tiny principality of Qatar is now having a very serious economic effect. The poison that has been unleashed by this unprecedented level of aggression against one of the members, I remind you, of the GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council, is itself just one of the issues. The ongoing crushing of the democracy movement in Bahrain is another. The attempts by the ruling families in Gulf countries, and that's what they are, ruling families, every bit as much as the Kim family in North Korea, which everyone jokes about. These are all ruling families. Their determination to crack down and crush any and all opposition to them inside their own tiny countries with their tiny populations is also ongoing. The branding and labeling of any opposition according to the prevailing winds of the time. All the while, the Western countries pick their pockets, pick the pockets of their people, the wealth that should be being used to invest for the future once oil is a distant memory. The attempts to build public infrastructure and other economic means of earning a living in the future are being entirely sacrificed to pay what is effectively protection money. Protection money to the US in particular, but also to Britain and France to a lesser degree. That if you continue to keep us in power, we'll allow you a share of our loot, and an ever-increasing share. It has many ways in which this is done, but the most significant in this story is the purchase of ever more expensive and ever more deadly Western weapons. It's a great pity. The Gulf is a very precious place. It contains the country which is the custodian of the two holy mosques, the two most important places in the religion of Islam, itself a religion with 2 billion adherents around the world. What happens there is of far greater moment than would be suggested by the smallness of the populations. So where is it all going to end? As I speak, there's a full-scale battle going on in Hodeidah in Yemen for control of the port, the airport. That battle is not yet finished, but the price being paid by the invaders and would-be occupiers is certainly high. What attitude will the neighboring countries take if this slaughter continues in its current form? If Saudi Arabia steps up the aggression against Qatar, steps 1 foot inside the border of Qatar, which it, of course, covets for itself, what will the attitude of Iran be? What will the attitude of Turkey be? What will the attitude of the United States be, given that the United States has its biggest military base in the world in the desert in Qatar? Let's turn to our distinguished experts for some explanation over what's happening and what's going to happen next. Yes, sir, you have the microphone. Please introduce yourself.
My name's Shram Malik. I've been in London for about 22 years, but I grew up in the Middle East. I grew up in Dubai. And generally speaking, I think the first thing we need to understand from today's debate is the other GCC countries look at Yemenis as subhuman. They always have. They do not treat them as their equal Arabs. So that's the first thing.
Let alone equal Muslim.
No, not at all. As far as Islam and being Muslim is concerned, they treat every other Muslim in the world who's non-Arab as someone who's inferior. And I've experienced that. The level of racism that you get in the UK is nothing compared to what you experience if you're from South Asia. I'm originally from Pakistan. And the level of racism I experienced there was unbelievable. Nothing compared to what we see here. And the second point is, it's a projection of power from Saudi's point of view, and also control of Aden and the strategic route into the Red Sea. They've already got Egypt on their side with the dictator Sisi in power. Now the crucial point is the entry point into the Red Sea. And that's what this fight is all about.
So you think they want to partition Yemen?
Absolutely.
Formally partition it in the way that it once was?
Absolutely. They've taken control of the island, an island, very recently. Absolutely. And now the end game is control of the ports of Aden and entry into the Red Sea. That's the end goal, in my opinion.
You say a projection of power, but what intends to be a projection of power can, of course, be a projection of weakness. The Yemenis are quite good fighters, whether
Absolutely.
the Saudis think they are inferior or not. They're certainly superior fighters to the Saudis. And as, if I may quote Chairman Mao, once said, sometimes the enemy struggles mightily to lift a huge stone only to drop it on its own feet. Is there a possibility that Saudi Arabia may drop this rock on its own feet?
I think it's already happening. I'll quote another one of Chairman Mao's
My goodness,
sayings.
2 in the 1 program. We'll be getting closed down.
He said, war is continuation of politics by other means.
Clausewitz, but Mao used it too, yeah?
Mao used it too. It's in his red book. But crucially, in this case, the Saudis, it's not continuation of politics. It's absolute control. That's what they're after. And I think it's been stated by Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, that Yemen is a blessed land, so is Syria. But when there's no peace in these two lands, be aware there won't be peace in the world. And we are seeing it. I mean, we're seeing the spread of ISIS, that ideology from Syria, is a direct result of what happened in Iraq. What happened in Iraq and what's happening in Yemen and what's happening in Syria, they're all linked together. And the control of Egypt, the overthrow of democratically elected government, and this Western support for Sisi is again support for Israel. Because I read somewhere that Israel saves 35% of its defense budget if it has peace with Egypt. And that's quite significant if we look at it from a geopolitical point of view.
Well, it's been saving that for a long time now.
Absolutely. But it wanted to continue to save that because ultimately when Muslim Brotherhood came into power, they are spiritually linked to Hamas.
It didn't make a great deal of difference to the people in Gaza.
It didn't, unfortunately, but there were steps being taken. They had to do it slowly. And I agree, they should have done it much quicker because ultimately what is happening in Gaza, I see it as being no different to what happened in Auschwitz, for example. When the historians have actually written history and their inks have dried, we will see Gaza in the same place, in the same chapter as Auschwitz, in my opinion.
Professor Mohammed, let's go back to first base here. There was a lot of talk, I fell for it myself, that the Crown Prince, MBS, had been killed or at least injured in what was described as a drone incident at the Royal Palace, I think in Jeddah. One hears of all kinds of currents inside the Saudi royal family, jostling for position, for power, for revenge. And yet there I saw the Crown Prince at the World Cup sitting next to President Putin, watching Saudi Arabia do rather poorly in the football, I'm sorry to say. That has continued into the second game. They've lost again and are going home. Was this just wishful thinking on the part of those who predicted big political changes in Saudi Arabia?
I think so. This is mostly wishful thinking because the existing royal family, the members of the existing royal family, there's no man who has the strength or the character really to confront. There's none, or none having enough house power. House power meaning, for example, in time past, Naif had the Secret Service and the Ministry of Interior, and he could rely on that in confronting his brothers for his own political directions, because he was anti-American for certain reasons. Salman did not have much house power being the governor of Riyadh, but later on, by stroke of luck, he became the defense minister, and then he has also, obviously, the army and also the royal guard on his side. Mit'ab has the National Guard. His father used to have that, but Mit'ab did not have the character and the strength. Actually, we have tweeted at that time, telling him, the turn is on you after Mohammed bin Naif was disposed of. Wake up and take destiny in your hand. And the stupid guy did not do anything. They came, obviously, to detain him. They couldn't rely on any local force. They detained him by Blackwater's Colombian, hired by Mohammed bin Zayed and Mohammed bin Salman. So nobody has real power, nobody has the real courage, and they are all shivering of fear. Even Walid bin Talal, who was quite relatively arrogant and putting his nose high and pretending to be one of the biggest business people in the world and the most sophisticated one, was forced really in the knees. And we have seen how they pay up and also to come in television and deny everything and so on. Obviously, under duress, you will do that. That's no problem. No blame. We know that. This is by necessity. But nevertheless, and now he is unable to move. And his family, I have some hints from some, they are all shivering. They are not even able to think what we can do. Could we have an external force financed? They have billions outside. They are not going with the
Why can't they buy their own Colombians?
That's, for example, there are many other ways to take revenge, but they don't live in this world. Maybe you have heard the story of that daughter of Mohammed al-Rashid al-Maktoum, who tried to escape several times. One of her simple plans was to go to the Omani border. Which kind of simplicity? Where do these people live? If you go to the border, either the Omani send you back or the border guard will send you back. And that's exactly what happened. Second step, she went to India and they caught her in Bombay. and she's back now under torture. They don't live in this world. They are not on planet Earth. They are on some another planet. So they're all wishful thinking. There's nothing what's going to happen. What will happen, most likely, is that the big rock will fall on the feet of the Saudis, Alexander the Great, Mohammed bin Salman, regard himself as Alexander the Great, and he will fail in Yemen. Who is failing? The failing is ongoing.
Well, we'll come back to that. Let me ask you a different question. You mentioned Mohammed bin Zayed there. This is one of the new developments. That whereas Sheikh Zayed was a wise old man who always sought mediation, conciliation. I talked many times with him.
Tribal way.
In a tribal way. I talked to him many times, 7, 8 times in the years before the last Iraq invasion and war. He's been replaced by people, sons who are not as wise, do not have the same instincts, and appear to have made this alliance, unholy alliance perhaps, between these two, the two crown princes, MBZ and MBS. Tell the viewers about that.
MBZ, the Mohammed bin Zayed, the son of Zayed himself, he is on record, as Al Jazeera has broadcasted, concerning the coup d'etat attempt in 96, 97, it's not 20 years ago. He's on record telling some of the coup d'etat participants when they told him, your father has given a promise. So all these promises are worthless in politics. And by the way, our father, Mukharraf, is senile. He's coming in old age, he's senile. So he looks at his own father as being senile. So what you call as reconciliatory Bedouin-style diplomacy, that has gone. Now have come someone who thinks he has the oil, he has relatively, well, we should admit, the Emirates had internal development and had money management, which is in par with what's happening in London and New York, but more vicious. In London, New York, the big thieves are sitting, but they're doing it nicely with a veil. He's doing it unveiled, that's it. So the big thieves of New York and London are represented with the unveiled thief who doesn't bother about money laundering, selling drugs, etc. That's all the center. So he has this money power, he has this position, he has the British protection, because this is an entity created by Britain in the first place to confront Saudi Arabia and prevent them from taking over the Gulf for the American domain. We should remember that in the 70s. All of that. And then there was a good development in metal construction, infrastructure in Dubai and around, and Jabal Ali. In the late 90s of the last century, he had enough strength and enough money accumulated. Actually, they have enormous reserves. They were able to buy Dubai and force it in the corner and buy its crown jewel, the Emirate Airlines. He felt, now it's time that I assert myself and put my policies. And it seems to be he has some odd relations with Mohammed bin Salman. Some people say he's holding some kind of videos. And usually there's if you have seen in the internet, Mohammed bin Zayed is shown holding a CD and looking at Mohammed bin Salman saying, I have the CD. God knows what the CD contains of scandals and things like that. And he's using that, plus obviously his superior age and his superior ability of mischief and trickery. Mohammed Salman is a naive.
So you think the Emirates are the head of this?
Yeah. And the battle about Hudaida and the taking over of
their
Qatar,
forces are heavily engaged.
They're playing it and letting the Saudis die, and they die much less.
They also keep posting advertisements about how much charity they're giving to the Yemen at the same time as destroying it.
They know this. The classical trick of the Bedouins. Say XYZ. He hurts and cures. So they say, if you hurt, try to do a bit of curing. So you can fool the simple minded. And they know that the Arabs generally tend to be, in the average, more generous and religious and respect you for your charity and good deeds and generosity. And they play this card. They will not look behind the scene.
I thought that it was the Americans, Blackwater, behind this attack on Hudaida.
Oh, yeah,
they've just hired the Emiratis.
The Emiratis are the ones. I see.
But there are Emirati forces engaged also. This is a new era of belligerence, of coming out of the tent, if you like, and projecting the power that they imagine.
Yes, but without Eric Prince, there couldn't be any war in Hudaida, the Blackwater. They seem to be the people behind the war. The Americans
Blackwater have their footprints over all of this story inside Saudi Arabia and also in Yemen, as they previously had in Iraq.
And they've got the Americans to tie up with the Chechens in Hodeidah.
Yes, well, we're going to deal in more depth with the Yemen war itself. Mohammed, I just want to ask you one final question, if I may, with a very brief answer. Are the Saudis going to win in Yemen, in your view?
No, and concerning Blackwaters, it's actually an American invention. In Iraq, Blackwaters at core, they're the one who died and suffered 50,000 dead, but they were not on record because they are not soldiers. They're not American citizens, so they are discounted.
No was the answer I was looking for. We'll explore that after this break. Kalima Horra with me, George Galloway, on Almayadeen Television, coming from London, but discussing the Gulf. We took the Kalima Horra camera onto the streets of London to discover what the British public have to say about it. Take a look.
You think that isolating Qatar has reduced the number of terrorist attacks in the region?
I think that the politics in that country is so complex that it's difficult for myself, being here, to have a good idea of what is going on.
I don't think anything we can do can change the terrorists' ideas of what they want to do and achieve by isolating one particular country or one particular place. So no, I don't think it's going to do very much in that sense. No,
I don't think it's going to make any impact. It's probably an economic move, adding pressure to Qatar.
Has isolating Qatar resulted in less terrorist attacks in the region?
I would say definitely not. Like, isolating Qatar in sort of a trade sort of way, trying to limit the amount of money they have, that's not really going to work.
I think it has probably helped some because they can keep better track and better location where they're located at, and maybe monitor better to see what is happening with that kind of stuff. But it's hard to say. It's so worldwide and so random and so many facets to it now that you can't track all of it.
Where do you think that Europe stands in the Gulf crisis at the moment?
I think Europe doesn't have a clue. Europe is nothing on the table, to be honest, today in the global world politics.
I think we just need to step back a little bit and only use our military for help, rather than for more power pressing. That's not what I think we need here.
I thought they'll be on the side of Qatar, but I know a lot of European countries in the United States, they like to have Saudi Arabia on their side because they control a lot of the oil reserves and they're kind of dependent on that.
Well, some might think it a trifle bizarre for Saudi Arabia to accuse someone else of sponsoring terrorism. But that's, of course, what's happened. The pot calling the kettle black. The Qataris have, of course, funded and supported terrorist acts and groups. But the Saudis have done much more of that. What do you think, sir? What's really behind the Saudi-Qatar conflict? And how does that fit into this overarching crisis?
Thank you, George. My name is Shabir Razvi. I'm an economist and a political commentator. Firstly, I like to sort of make a really vivid point that we must really remember that the Saudi regime came into existence because of Britain, because Britain supported, nurtured, and put them in power. The other regime that Britain created was the regime in Tel Aviv. These two have been the sort of bane of the problem in the Middle East and the Muslim world, if you like. People come out demonstrations on Quds Day against the occupation of the holy site in Israel. But we also need to liberate the two most holy sites, Mecca and Medina, from the Saudi regime. The trademark of the Saudis since its inception has been plunder and pillage. There is historical evidence. This is not conspiracy theory. This is not sort of hearsay. It is evident that for the last 90 odd years, Saudis have created chaos on this planet, and particularly in the last 30, 40 years, since 1971, when the gold standard was abandoned and the petrodollar became the currency, more money has flooded into Saudi Arabia. So if you look at any of the terrorist groups, whether it's Boko Haram or Shabab or the problem in Philippines, wherever there is chaos, or Pakistan, the Taliban in Afghanistan, you name one country where the footprint of the Saudis is not to be seen. So the reality is that our government, the British government, continues to supply most sophisticated weapons to the Saudis without any qualms. The Americans, very clearly, Mr. Trump, at least one thing that I can say about Trump is that he's very honest. He says, give me the money and we'll protect you. He's clearly said that on many occasions, and he only wants money. So long as the Saudis are willing to supply the money to the Americans, America will provide what the hoodlums of Chicago used to do, give protection to the shopkeepers there at that time. So Saudis are seen as the cash cow to provide the money to the Americans in that sense. I think, just to quote Mao Zedong for the third time on this program, he said that one who fights and runs away lives to fight another day. So perhaps the Yemeni fighters at this moment are having a strategy that, okay, we'll fight, but perhaps we might have to run away to fight another day. And you must remember that back in 1934, for a brief period, Hodeidah was under the occupation of the Saudis, and they had to relinquish that for the last 60, 70 years. So, like my learned friend here said, that Saudis are not likely to win in Yemen. Yes, they will create pillage and plunder and kill the human beings at that in the whole of Yemen. But the reality is that Saudis are on the wrong side of history. There is no doubt at all. People will say, okay, Israel has been there for 70 years, the Saudi regime has been there for 80, 90 years. But this is really blink of an eyelid in a historical perspective. It may not happen in my lifetime, but certainly I can see that within the next 20, 30 years, there will be no Saudi regime, there will be no sort of Zionist regime in Palestine. And the reality will be that people will be liberated. Because, George, oppression cannot continue forever. This is not what I am saying. This is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran clearly says, that the oppressor will be defeated. For us living through oppression, it seems a difficult battle. It seems that the oppressor is winning all the time. But the reality is that oppression cannot continue forever. And the oppressors, the oppressed will be victorious in due course.
That's, of course, a very interesting perspective, and the historical note that you strike is apt, that Britain was the midwife of both the State of Israel and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. But Britain is a small player nowadays, and that was the best part of 100 years ago. Why are the Saudis still, it would appear, from what Professor Mohammed was saying, pretty firmly in their own saddle? After all, it's not that they're delivering too many goods for their own people. Their own people are paying taxes that they never paid before. They're paying for public services that they didn't pay for before. They're privatizing their national treasure. There's a very big unemployment problem amongst educated Saudis. They have dressed a lot of their citizenry up with education and aspiration, but with nowhere to go. So how come they appear still to be pretty firmly in the saddle?
I think the word that you've used, appear, superficially, things may look hunky-dory, but the reality, as the professor and my other friend earlier said, that what looks outwardly stable, the reality is that historically monarchies have intrigues, palace intrigues go on. Historically, in a monarchy system, the father kills the son will kill the other brother to occupy the position
Well, even
of power.
more in this case, because it's not father to son. It's not ordinarily anyway. It's passing along lines, going up and down. People are having jobs promised to them and then having them taken away and so on. It is quite surprising that MBS was sitting there with Putin, don't you think?
Well, I think really it's football, I suppose, at that time.
No, but I was surprised to see him still alive. I was absolutely convinced that the propaganda I'd heard was...
Even you fell for the fake news.
I did, because he hadn't been seen for a very long time and he didn't show up to meet Pompeo when he visited. I thought there was something funny going on, but I was a victim of the fake news. Let's go to, yes, the gentleman there.
Thank you, George. Just to add on the Yemen subject, I'm no fan of Saudi Arabia, but just as Russia are in Syria at the invitation of the Syrian government, are Saudi Arabia not in Yemen at the invitation of the Yemeni government?
Well, no, there is no Yemeni government as such, and in fact there were two contenders for the throne, if you like, the presidential chair. Both of them were long-term allies of Saudi Arabia. In fact, when Ali Abdullah Saleh, now deceased, was first overthrown and horrifically burned in a military attack on his palace, he went to Saudi Arabia to be fixed up. So the attempts of the Saudi propaganda machine is to, first of all, pose this as a Sunni-Shia battle, as a legitimacy-illegitimacy battle, but that's all nonsense. Neither of the two presidents who were vying for power had any real popular legitimacy at all.
And it's not a proxy war, an Iranian...
Well,
Saudi
that's an
proxy
interesting
war.
issue that we need to explore. They say it's as part of the Sunni-Shia dichotomy. What they mean by that is Iran. But Iran seems to be doing virtually nothing to assist the people being slaughtered in Yemen. Seems to me if they were behind this uprising, they're not doing a very good job of it. The ability of Iran in its current circumstances to make a military intervention is, of course, very, very limited. And the Iranian leadership made clear just a few days ago that they were not planning on any military intervention, though, of course, everything's in a state of flux. Let's go to this gentleman here.
Thank you. مساء الخير. أنا غيث التميمي رئيس المركز العراقي لإدارة التنوع. تصوري إذا أردنا أن نقف على جوهر الأزمة الخليجية هو محاولة السيطرة على الراديكالية الإسلامية والتوحش اللي صار يتنامى بشكل فقدت القوى المؤثرة أو التي تكاد تكون مؤثرة على الجماعات الجهادية قدرتها على التحكم بهذه الجماعات. هو السيطرة على هذا التغول الجماعات الجهادية الإسلامية هو الحقيقة جوهر الأزمة الخليجية. العربية السعودية طبعا هذا الهامش من الاقتصاد، مشاكل التمويل، الفلوس، التبادل التجاري والمالي مع الأمريكان وغيره، هذا هامش، لأنه بالنتيجة العربية السعودية أو منطقة الخليج هي منطقة منتجة للنفط، ولكن هي منطقة استهلاكية مو منطقة صناعية. أولا وآخرا هي لابد أن تبحث عن أسواق تبيع البترول، والبترول أسواقه هي أسواق غربية، فهذه نوع من تصدير أو تسويق، عملية طبيعية. عملية تصدير البترول للغرب هي عملية كلش طبيعية. لو كانت مو بالخليج البترول موجود بمصر أو موجود بالسودان هم كان يصدر للغرب، لأن هذه طبيعة حركة الاقتصاد. لكن جوهر الأزمة بالحقيقة هو السيطرة على الجماعات الجهادية. بتصوري أن العربية السعودية تشهد تحول جوهري في داخل المملكة. هذا التحول إلى علاقة بالسيطرة على الوهابية. الجماعات الوهابية ينبغي أن تبقى تحيد نفسها وتعيد إنتاج نفسها في إطار النص الديني المتسامح، مذهب الإمام أحمد بن حنبل، أو بشكل مقبول إسلاميا. بالنسبة إلى قطر، قطر تشتغل على لاين سابقا بهذا البرنامج مع جالوي تحدثنا عنه. قطر رغم أنه هي دولة صغيرة لكن تلعب دور خطير جدا بالتعامل مع جماعة الإخوان المسلمين كقوة أيديولوجية، إلى جانبها هي مغذي أساسي تحاول إعادة إنتاج فكرة القومية العربية بطريقة إسلاموية. لذلك هي كانت محرك أساسي وممول أساسي ومغذي مهم للحركات الجهادية من جهة، إضافة إلى الحركات الإسلام السياسي السني في المنطقة. السعودية شعرت نفسها بدأت تفقد قدرتها على التأثير الجاد والفعلي بالمنطقة، لأنه السعودية يهمها أن يكون الإسلام موجود بالمنطقة، لكن ينبغي أن يكون إسلام طقوسي، إسلام تدين، مو إسلام تنظيمات سياسية أو تنظيمات جهادية. لأن التنظيمات الجهادية والتنظيمات السياسية بالحقيقة ما تأخذ مكة مصدر إلهام روحي، إنما تأخذ الشريعة والقرآن وتروح تأسس بدول حيثما تكون الجماعات الإسلامية. فشل تجربة داعش في العراق، في سوريا، هو النقطة المفصلية اللي فجرت الخلاف بين السعودية وقطر، لأنه كان التعويل أن تنجح تجربة إقامة دولة إسلامية، دولة خلافة إسلامية في المنطقة بشكل وبآخر، وتفرضها عوامل سياسية وعوامل ضغط معينة. وهذه كان من مصلحة الإخوان المسلمين تنجح تجربة في مصر فيظهرون كقوة اعتدال إذا ما قيست إلى داعش. لكن فشل تجربة الإخوان في المسلمين في مصر، فشل تجربة داعش في سوريا والعراق، هذه العوامل كان لها الدور الرئيسي في تفجر الخلاف بين قطر والسعودية.
There'll be more of this after the break. You're watching Kalima Horra with me, George Galloway, on Almayadeen television. We took the camera out onto the street to see how well educated the British public were about what's going on in the Gulf. Take a look.
Do you think that the presence of Saudi Arabia in the Middle East has brought any benefits with it? Like, do you think they influence any countries positively?
I think they play this two-faced role in the region, right? They try to play this, I'm a Western and friendly country, but at the same time, they're kind of feeding into the old traditions and the oppression that kind of creates a lot of radicalism, which eventually feeds into terrorist groups and other stable kind of groups and other countries that makes them more unstable.
Well, the influence is there, obviously. There is a war in the Middle East. There are many parties in that war. Some of them are supported by US, some of them are supported by Russia. In some cases, like ISIS, Russia and US are together. In some other cases, not. But Saudi Arabia has a lot of influence, yes.
So what benefits do you think have arisen from the growing Saudi Arabian presence in the Middle Eastern region?
Them saying that Saudi Arabia's presence, is it a presidency, is it, or somebody's getting involved? I think it's probably more just on paper, to say that they're trying to do something, but I don't think it's really I don't think it's going to make much difference, to be honest.
That I'm not really sure. I mean, they seem to have been pretty good allies to us in the past, so it could be a thing where they may become a calming effect or stabilizing things a little bit, showing that things aren't as need to be as radical or as bad as some of the extremists tend to promote.
A rather confused picture there on the streets of London as well there might be. Mohammed, briefly respond please to our friend.
I think this is the standard analysis of those who call themselves democratic and liberal and so on. But this doesn't fit to the historic reality. For example, let's say ISIS in Iraq. This is Zarqawi, who is a split, actually, organization from Al-Qaeda. He's not Al-Qaeda, although he forced himself on Al-Qaeda, and Al-Qaeda could not otherwise accept that forcing for obvious reasons. He was in we know that. We have insider information, we have communication with these people over the last 10, 15 years. Some people go there, now you will be tried for terrorism. I don't care. Zarqawi, when he was in Afghanistan, declared all Afghani fighters, with one exception, Mullah Omar alone, as a person, as kafir, as disbeliever. So this man is extremely radical, most likely controlled by remote in a complicated way, which I explain on another occasion, not now, by the Jordanian intelligence, which means MI6. The Jordanian intelligence is the local branch of the MI6. This man has been directed together with also Iranian intelligence, a Machiavellian plan, but was intelligent because Iran was on the list after Iraq. So Iran protected itself. It's Machiavellian. I disagree with that, but that's their ijtihad, their point of view. They protected themselves by cooperating with America inside Iraq and just pulling the rug under the Americans and preempting any American attack, delaying it as much as possible, negotiating secretly a nuclear deal, which has been in the drawers kept for 10 years and came out recently, a couple of years ago. And they were able to penetrate in Zarqawi's organization and move them against the American. So the Americans will bleed, and they did bleed considerably. They were almost defeated, and also against the local Iraqi anti-Iranian Shia, so that they were forced to see we need protection. These Sunni are slaughtering us. Who will protect us? Iran. So they came in the embrace of Iran, because the Shia of Iraq were never acknowledging Qum as the leadership. The leadership was always Najaf, not there, and they never looked at Iran as a leader. Now they were forced in the Iranian arm, and then later on, the process of dispatching and eliminating ISIS, and every organization in the world, every sector organization tried to benefit of ISIS for their own purpose. The Saudi tried to benefit from it, but they were ineffective because they're stupid, not as sharp and intelligent like the Iranian, but also the Americans did benefit from it partly, and they were dropping weapons by mistake to ISIS. We know that. That's all on the table now. And they used it in Syria to undermine the revolution and play both sides and balance the weights. So this analysis is not correct. Look, now, and even in time past, when the Wahhabi movement started in Najd, whatever the motivation was, maybe the obsessed man of a certain idea, the British did adopt that, and they communicated the early Saudi state to control the Qawasma in Sharqa, who were attacking the British ships at that time. And one of the leaders of the Qawasma was invited to Riyadh because he was Wahhabi, and he was imprisoned in Riyadh in the time of the first Saudi state, 250 years ago. So this is... It's not the tawahush at-tawaghul. The tawahush at-tawaghul and the brutality and the bloodshed of ISIS and the first Saudi state, second Saudi state was quite benign. And the third Saudi state were a tool in the hand of imperial powers and local chieftains who want to have kingdom and thrones. And the British were offering that. By the way, I want to just object to the claim that North Korean having a ruling family. It is a leading family. It's not only, this is a communist party there. They have established the country after a long war. China has fought ferociously. They defeated the American. MacArthur was screaming, asking for nuclear weapons, but luckily an intelligent Truman rejected that, and that country was carved by a leadership party with a leadership family. It is not like, you cannot compare a modern country like North Korea with these backward feudal regimes like...
I've been out-Korea'd by a Saudi professor. Yes, sir, go ahead.
Yeah, hello, my name is Yasser Zuraqi from Yemen. Yeah, what Saudi Arabia is the need to do, that's what an attack in Yemen, that's in Hudaydah, and now it's more civilians, people die and things. The things what they do is in Qatar, what is that? Qatar is a small country, but it's big media. They can do nothing with Qatar because they're big media. Because with Yemen, there's nothing to.
Well, they forced Qatar Airways into administration. They forced 20% retrenchment in the television station in Al Jazeera. There are shortages in Qatar. So this embargo is having its effect.
Yeah. Unfortunately.
Now, you're a Yemeni, so, and you came late. I asked the professor to answer in a word. Let me ask you to answer in a few words. Is this Saudi war going to end in victory for the Saudis? And if so, at what price?
No, they will not end it. They will got more west. They will end themselves. But for Yemen, they will getting more west. That's not. They will not end it.
You don't think they're going to be victorious?
The Ghana never wins because already they are a loser, and they will lose again and again. Because now when they start to do in the other side of Yemen, the Hafen or Hodeidah, and that is really for them is more.
Okay, let's take the young gentleman in the middle row.
I did actually study the Arab-Israeli conflict briefly at GCSE, so I know a little bit about it. I think one of the most recent historical events that I think probably explains the Saudi grudgery against the Yemenis is that their government did actually support Iraq during the Gulf War, and it was the only other Arab country, apart from Iraq itself, to support Iraq. I think for the Saudis, personally, it's their kind of retribution, if you like, that the Yemenis basically turned against their interests, and I think that that one thing is certainly going to define that grudgery. I mean, of course, it's going to kick back and forth because the Yemenis are not going to forgive the Saudis too readily for what they've done to their country. Granted, it was on behalf of Britain and United States, of course, but I think that the historical rivalry between, or this historical sort of rift between Saudi Arabia and Yemen is definitely their role in definitely the role in aiding and abetting Iraq, and that will obviously define Saudi's relationship with Iraq for a long time, as to say nothing of the sectarian divide.
Okay, thank you very much. You, sir?
I just read a news on Twitter just before coming here that Saudi Arabia is planning to dig a channel to cut off Qatar completely and make it an island. How, if that happens, what will be the impact in the region?
Well, we'll sell more ships to a new Qatari navy to patrol the waterway. I didn't know that news, but it does indicate that, contrary to what people in Whitehall think and Westminster think, this conflict between Saudi Arabia and Qatar, whilst it may have gone quieter, is definitely not over. And the Saudis have not given up their desire, wish, will to bring about regime change in Qatar. What do you think? You lived in the region for many years, were brought up and educated there. The Saudis really seem to be going for this, and yet it's on, even if you are correct, it's on a rather limited basis. As a casus belli, it doesn't hold very much water.
No, I think there's an important point to address here. This idea that the conflict in Yemen is a Shia and Sunni conflict is a fallacy.
Totally, yeah.
And I'll explain why. The Houthi Shias follow the Hanafi school of thought, which is the school of thought within Sunni Islam, which is followed by majority of the Sunni Muslims, especially in South Asia. So the way they pray and majority of their underlying beliefs are very similar to Sunnis. So there is no interest from Iran in supporting them. And just a historical point I'd like to mention, during the 6th and the 7th centuries, Yemen was actually part of the Persian Empire. Firoz, when the Muslims invaded Yemen, it was actually part of the Persian Empire. Firoz being a very famous governor who became Muslim at the time. That's one point. Another point I'd like to make, and it's a question I'd like to leave for the audience, is 2 years after the conflict in Syria, the head of Saudi intelligence was Prince Bandar bin Turk, bin Sultan, who was the Saudi ambassador in US for 30 years. Think about it. My family hails from Peshawar, the city that borders Afghanistan, where the Mujahideen were trained. And basically, they've not learned their lesson. They create these Frankenstein monsters, the Western powers, in conjunction with Saudi Arabia. And the Wahhabi school of thought, the extreme view of the Wahhabi school of thought, they inculcate people with these ideologies of extremism where they reflect a very limited, or they teach a very limited and narrow historical perspective of Islam to students. And there are some madrasas there. The Haqqaniya madrasa, just outside Peshawar, is a very good example of this. And then now just coming back to the point about Yemen. Yemen has historically always been a tribal society. There are tribes, and they've always had some degree of difficulty coexisting. So they're warring tribes, and they've, to a certain degree, agreed to governments in the past, but they've never lived in peace. So if the Saudi regime thinks that they're going to somehow win in Yemen, right, they've got another thing coming. The Yemenis will never accept them. The Yemenis did not accept their school of thought internally. The Yemenis still follow the school of thought of Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal and Imam Azam Abu Hanifa. They've never accepted that, and they are unlikely to accept it now, since the belligerence with which they've been murdering people. And you look at the Indian regime, extremely anti-Muslim, extremely far-right, yet they declared peace during Ramadan and round of Eid. The Saudi with Kashmiris and other uprisings with the Muslim rebels in other parts of India. But the so-called Saudi Muslim regime and the UAE Muslim regime failed to do that.
They broke the ceasefire.
No, they never declared a ceasefire. They're Muslims too. Despite what you might have difference of opinion, but they're Muslims at the end of the day. They should have shown courtesy, and this has been happening every year. On the contrary, they seem to increase their bombardment during Ramadan. And another perspective that we haven't explored here is 1,600 Pakistani troops landed in Saudi Arabia 5 months ago. And what I'd like to mention here is these
I thought the Pakistani government had said they would not fight in Yemen.
They would not fight in Yemen. They've come to an agreement, and that agreement is that the troops that fought in South Waziristan successfully and in North Waziristan would train the Saudis, because they're getting an absolute hammering. Because the terrain is very similar, it's mountainous, semi-desert, it gets very cold. In Yemen, it's the same. The geography of Yemen is different to other parts of the Middle East. We've got to remember that as well when we look at the whole picture. It's mountainous, semi-desert. It tends to get cold in the winter, and the Saudi forces are not used to that. So they've called 1,600 troops who've fought in South Waziristan, North Waziristan, and the Quram agencies to train the Saudis. They're not going to engage directly because there'll be an uprising in Pakistan. In fact, the country would be in danger of breaking up, because the military is the only institution in the country that is actually left.
What is the sort of casualty level in this war? We know the civilian casualties in Yemen are massive, in the many thousands, and then you add the famine and the cholera and so on. But amongst the fighting forces, what level of attrition is there?
Very high. Is this a simple and direct answer? I was in UAE during the start of this war, and the moment you see martyrs and their mothers being shown on TV and patriotic songs being played regularly, you know straight away that there is high casualty rate amongst the soldiers, and it's the same. The use of mercenaries has gone up quite considerably. They're using American mercenaries only because they couldn't buy Pakistani mercenaries. They asked for forces, they didn't get them because the opposition intervened. It was the government had agreed, they'd signed on the dotted line, but the military And the opposition stood up. They said, no, we're not going to send our troops to slaughter Yemenis. It's not going to happen.
More of this after the break. You're watching Kalima Horra on Almayadeen TV. With me, George Galloway, talking about the crisis in the Gulf, which grows ever deeper. The crisis between Saudi Arabia and the Emirates and other principalities and the Principality of Qatar, but most deeply, waist deep in blood in Yemen. Yes, sir. William.
Yes, George. My name is William Spring. I think the Yemeni crisis at Hodeidah sums up the Yemeni war, because my information is that President Trump actually directed Eric Prince and Blackwater, which now goes under another name, to...
We'll still call them Blackwater.
Yeah, we'll call them Blackwater. To superintend the offensive against Hodeidah, which includes Saudi, inverted commas around Saudi, troops, American troops, Chechens, Israeli and French troops. And this is a pretty appalling disgrace. Britain has...
It's rather old-fashioned. It's got a kind of 19th century feel to it, that.
Yes, and Britain has given diplomatic support by stopping a ceasefire resolution at the United Nations.
British are stopping ceasefire talks, yes.
So Mrs May will be responsible, if the Saudis succeed in their offensive, in killing maybe 4 million Yemenis, because there will be a complete blockade and starvation, mass starvation of children, women, and these pictures will be on the British TV screens.
And all these liberals who are crying about refugee children in a camp on the Mexican border will have nothing to say about millions of Yemeni children actually dying, not being kept in an air-conditioned tent.
And I just...
Iraqis in the 90s.
Of course, exactly so.
I just add that we've had experience, as George has reminded us, of the Yemen. It was a very bad experience. I was brought up to believe that one of our great heroes was Mad Mitch.
I remember him well, yes. He was commanding a Scottish regiment.
Yeah, down in Crater. In
the Crater district in Aden,
And we didn't succeed. I mean, it's absolutely absurd for the Saudis to think, and President Trump and Blackwater and Eric Prince, it's absurd for Eric Prince to think that he can bring Yemen under the control of the Saudis. Nothing is possible. Nothing is more remotely impossible as that.
Well, I mean, it seems to me that, of course, all these countries are good at destroying from the air, and they can blockade. There are many peoples in the world being blockaded. Cuba has been blockaded for well over half a century. But putting boots on the ground and controlling life and ensuring outcomes on the ground has proved impossible for the might of the American and British Army in Iraq, for example.
Exactly.
They had to leave Iraq under fire. In the British case in Basra, they had to steal away like thieves in the night, in the middle of the night. In Haifa Street in Baghdad, they couldn't, the Americans could no longer go there. A street as long as you can imagine, a huge, long street. No Americans could go there because they lost so many people there. So who's going to control the streets of Yemen?
Quite.
It's not going to be a mercenary from Colombia.
No.
Okay, anyone else? Right, I want to go back round our experts, starting with our Yemeni guest. You're welcome to speak in Arabic, brother, and Professor Mohammed can translate for you. I'm just trying to establish whether this is wishful thinking on my part and William's part, or whether we could wake up in the next day or two and discover that the port has fallen, the airport has fallen. The Saudi coalition are there, and they succeed in at least partitioning Yemen. What's your genuine, scientific appreciation of that?
كما قال الأخ الجمامي قبل شوية، خلقت الفتنة السعودية ما بين مدارس الوهابية، ما بين سنة وشيعة، وكنا لا نعرف لا سنة ولا شيعة في الذات. أنا أمي زيدية وأبي من الجنوب زريقي، يعني يعود إلى المناطق الوسطى، شافعي، وأمي من بيت البخيت الحدا، معروفين أقربائنا زيدية. وفي السابق كنا نصلي سوا، نعمل سوا، نطلع سوا، نعمل، عمرنا ما نعرف كلمة حوثي زيدي سني شيعي. هذا خلقوا لنا فتنة. لا أريد أقول إيش اللي هذا كسر.
سأل ما رأيك في الحرب، هل ستنجح السعودية وتفشل؟ يعني بس النقطة هذه.
لا، السعودية فاشلة ما أكيد، يعني هذا يعني مؤكد وحتما في القريب، حتى تخلص تحلب البقرة يعني ترامب يخلص يحلبهم، في النهاية يأتي وقتهم. وماذا استفادت من حربها في اليمن؟ والشيء الآخر اللي أريد أقوله، ماذا استفادت من حصار قطر كذلك؟
Let's take the gentleman next to you first. No, next to you.
شكرا. الشيء المهم، أنا بس أود أن أكد أني أتفق مع اللي قال البروفيسور محمد حول وجود علاقة بين إيران وبين التنظيمات الجهادية والإخوان المسلمين، ولها يد أيضا بتمويل القاعدة وتوسع نفوذها، وخصوصا الزرقاء بالعراق، كذلك لها يد بداعش. هذا لا ينفي بأنه الفكر الفقه اللي كانت تعتمده داعش هو فقه وهابي سلفي وسعودي، يعني بالنتيجة مدارس سعودية، لكن الأيديولوجيا اللي كانت تغذي الشباب وتعبئهم هي أيديولوجيا الإخوان المسلمين. يعني ينبغي أن لا نحمل السعودية كل المسؤولية ونبرئ قطر والإخوان المسلمين، كذلك لا ينبغي لكن علينا أن نقول دائما في الشرق يوجد ثالوث للخراب والدمار. هذا الثالوث ثالوث إسلاموي يقوم على الوهابية والإخوان المسلمين وولاية الفقيه. كذلك يوجد لدينا أزمة الإخوان المسلمين اللي تغذي الشباب العربي بقضايا كبرى من دون رادع، تغذيهم على إقامة الخلافة الإسلامية، توحيد العالم الإسلامي من خلال قتل المسلم للمسلم، تفجير المساجد، قتل الأطفال والنساء. كذلك التنظيمات الجهادية الإرهابية التي تستند إلى الفكر السلفي الوهابي، التي جعلت الشباب العربي والمسلم يستبيح دم أمه وأبيه وأخيه ويفجر في كل مكان يكون فيه، ويعتبر عمل هذا جهاد. المشكلة الآن السعودية بصدد تحول خطير وكبير. نعم هو ليس جوهري، أتفق، هو ليس جوهري، لكن السعودية بصدد تحول كبير جدا. أعطت ظهرها للفكر السلفي، أعطت ظهرها للقاعدة، أعطت ظهرها للجهاديين، وتريد تتحول. أزمتها الأخلاقية الآن اليمن، هي خسرت الحرب في اليمن، وينبغي على السعودية والإمارات أن يعترفوا بأنهم خسروا الحرب، وينبغي عليهم أن يعترفوا بالانتهاكات. لكن لا ينبغي أن يكون خسارة السعودية في اليمن تعني أن الحوثيين على حق. الحوثيين أداة تخريب إيرانية تهدف إلى إنشاء فكر جهادي متطرف في اليمن. هم مخربون، كما أن الحرب ضد الشعب اليمني دمار.
Doctor.
Not quite a doctor yet, but thank you very much.
You're a scholar, and that's why I'm asking you this question. For especially the Western viewers who will see this, who are an increasing number online and YouTube and so on, this is all rather confusing. Saudi Arabia is seen as an austere, strict, orthodox, Sunni Muslim power. So why do they hate the Muslim Brotherhood so much? So much that they're prepared to go to war with their neighbor, Qatar, when they're already in another war with their other neighbor. Please.
Okay, firstly, I'd like to make a comment briefly on our professors. I think Iran does not play Machiavellian politics, firstly. It has been very apparent, very clear that Iran has never,
Must be
ever,
the only country in the world that doesn't play Machiavellian politics.
It has never been in bed with Al-Qaeda. I think this is Washington, London and Paris propaganda, which even analysts sometimes succumb to it. So the reality is that Iran is diagrammatically opposed to what ISIS, Al-Qaeda and all the Salafi elements globally stand for. Yes, there is a different way of administering a government through the Walayat-e-Faqih concept. This is not the right time or the occasion or the program to discuss this in detail. Whether it is appropriate or suitable, that's a different matter. We can have a discussion sometimes later. So that's one point that I wanted to make. Secondly, I think the economic crisis that is gripping the whole of the Middle East, with the petrol price being down from $140 to 40, then to 80, and now in sort of 70s. So the budgets...
Trump is demanding still lower.
Yeah, absolutely. So the budgets are being constrained. Secondly, if you see in the recent past, in the beginning of this year, VAT has become a vogue in the Middle East. It has started with 5%. If you recall, in the UK, we started with 7.5%, and we are now 20%. When there are money coming into the treasury is limited, then people are taxed to the bone. So that's an indication of what the problems are happening. Thirdly, majority of the workers in the Middle East are expats. If there is a crisis, and you recall 1991 Kuwait, when the ruling family was living in Edgware Road, if the crisis happens, even the ruling families would perhaps come to London and Paris, and the expats would leave the countries themselves. So there is a huge economic challenge which is being faced. And of course, the drain on the treasury of fighting war in Yemen, funding terrorists in Syria, funding terrorists in Iraq, and all over the place does have an impact in reality. And to answer your question finally on the Brotherhood and the Saudi and the Wahhabi, the Brotherhood were always pampered and supported by the Wahhabis in the beginning. Yes, there have been schisms and differences of opinion between the Saudis, religious elite.
They were supported against President Nasser, of course.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's abundantly clear that happened. So there may be Machiavellian politics being played, if you like.
Well, they're the princes of Machiavellian politics. It is, though, still somewhat surprising that two countries next door with the same kind of tribal makeup, both filthy rich at the top, but with problems down below, that they are ready to dig a moat, as someone just pointed out on Twitter, literally dig a moat around each other, fill it with water and declare you an island. In a nutshell, can you say what you really think this conflict is about between Saudi Arabia and Qatar?
Well, I think someone quite appropriately tweeted after the Moroccan own goal against Iran was Middle East politics as far as the Wahhabis and Salafis are concerned, that they score their own goals. So Iran doesn't have to do much.
Don't miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. It's been a fascinating discussion. I don't think we solved the problem of the crisis in the Gulf, but I'm certain that we'll have to return to it on another occasion. I've been George Galloway. This has been Kalima Horra for Almayadeen Television, coming to you from London.